Hi, Dirk and Amrutham, can you both hear me?
I can.
Yes.
This is Dirk.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, we had a little bit of technical switchover, so I think we're ready to get started. It looks like we have 72 participants on right now, so let's go ahead and get started.
Cool.
Sure.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Columbia Riverkeeper today as we talk to the experts about why we should fear a Chernobyl-like catastrophe at Hanford and how not to get discouraged about it. So my name is Simone Anter. I'm a staff attorney at Columbia Riverkeeper, and I will be moderating the panel. Before I introduce our panelists, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the Wanapum people, the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Nez Perce tribe, and other Native people who've used the land now occupied by the Hanford nuclear site since time immemorial, and whose traditional use of the area is severely infringed and threatened by current and future contamination at the site. Now, joining us today, we have Dirk Dunning, a retired chemical engineer and nuclear specialist from the Oregon Department of Energy, and Amrutham Babu, the outreach manager for Hanford Challenge. For personal reasons, Tom Carpenter, the executive director of Hanford Challenge, will no longer be joining our panel today. However, I know that both Dirk and Amrutham have a lot of great information to share with you all. So big thank you to our panelists who will be discussing the frightening consequences the delayed cleanup could have at one of Hanford's most high-risk facilities, the Waste Encapsulation and Storage Facility, or WESF, a place that houses 1/3 of all radioactivity at the site. So following the presentations, we will have time for a Q&A, so please make sure to send your questions through the Q&A or chat function of the webinar. And without further delay, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Dirk, and you can go ahead and share your screen and get started. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dirk Dunning. I was an engineer through all of my career, registered professional chemical, nuclear system, control system, forensic engineer. I retired 2.5 years ago from the state, or 3 years ago now. Good grief, time flies and you're having fun. I spent 40 years as a registered engineer doing all kinds of hazardous work. In the last 25 years of my career, I spent working on the Hanford nuclear site for the state of Oregon as senior technical expert on all kinds of things there. When I retired, I had a list of 12 particular topics that I was working on that I called my dirty sticks. This is the dirtiest of them all. This is the one that I had as my highest priority to get resolved before the end of my career. And as I go through the talk, you may be shocked or terrified by what you hear, and that's appropriate. At the same time, these things only happen if we allow them to. And so I have a request for each and all of you that my time in working on Hanford is done. My generation is pretty much done. And it's now time to turn over to a new generation. And I believe Amrutham is going to talk more about that later. I'll have 2 requests for you at the end of how you can get involved to help take care that this actually gets resolved. So the topic today is the Waste Encapsulation Storage Facility. The U.S. Department of Energy loves to use really difficult names. And in particular, this is what could happen there that could cause a catastrophe. This is a picture of the northern door, the front door of the WESF facility. It's also called the 225B building as part of the B Canyon. The building in the upper left is part of the canyon structure. And you can see that better when we look from the north looking south. The B Canyon was one of the big chemical processing canyons. It's 1,000 feet long, 66 feet wide, and it actually extends several stories into the ground. This is where nuclear fuel was dissolved and separated to produce pure plutonium for nuclear weapons in the United States. During the years of operation at Hanford, one of the things that happened is that they discharged the radioactive waste from these buildings into underground tanks. And the waste, in many cases, was extremely thermally hot from radioactive decay. And that decay caused a number of the tanks to be what were called self-boiling. And that was intentional. They concentrated the waste, and the waste then caused the liquid to boil, and it evaporated water, and they continually added more and more water. In 1965, there was a disaster at Hanford that almost nobody knows about. Tank A105 exploded. It ripped a 15-foot gash in the bottom of the tank and lost a huge amount of radioactive waste to the soil. It also vented radioactive waste to the air and had a very radioactive plume at 500 millirem per hour at the entrance to the tank farm. This facility was built in order to take the waste that was separated from the tanks that was generating the heat, the radioactive cesium and the radioactive strontium, and then to convert it into salt form for use, or not for use, for placement into capsules to store. WESF was built in the early 1970s. It began use in 1974, and it had a 30-year design life. It contains today actually 84 million curies of extremely radioactive and dangerous cesium-135, cesium-137, strontium-90, and their daughters. And these are in steel capsules under about 18 feet of water. In total, there's, I believe the number is 1,962 capsules, but it's just shy of 2,000. Today, the basin is 46 years old. As I said, it was designed to last for 30 years, and it's severely damaged and failing. It was not intended to be in service this long. The radioactive cesium in particular is a problem in that as part of its decay through barium, it emits a very powerful gamma ray. And that gamma ray can damage concrete and has. The U.S. Department of Energy did an analysis of it, and the concrete strength today is somewhere between 0% at the surface of the concrete and 75% at the middle of the walls of the basin's construction. And it's important to remember that that structural strength is all about holding things up. It's not about containing liquid. The cells themselves are lined with stainless steel, but ultimately, with the amount of damage that's already occurred, complete failure is inevitable. The only questions are when and how fast. When the basin fails, all of the contents of the cesium capsules will be released. DOE would take argument with that, but the reality is from their own studies that in time the capsules will corrode and fail. In March 2011, the reactors at Fukushima blew up, just as Chernobyl did before it. DOE then began a disaster potential analysis nationwide of all their facilities. An engineer at Hanford, Greg Morgan, did the analysis for WESF. And what he found was that the concrete walls and floors of the WESF basin were severely degraded. The centerline strength of the walls in 2012 roughly were down to 84% of the design strength. And that's, at the surfaces, they have no strength at all. In August of 2012, DOE declared what they call a potential inadequacy of a safety analysis, a PISA. Again, they love complex acronyms. Later that same month, they confirmed that there was an inadequacy of the safety analysis. In February of 2013, after I looked through it, I found that the day after they declared it on a notification system that we read every day, and it struck me immediately how severely damaged the walls were. I began my own analysis then to determine what does this mean, what are the risks, what's going on. And in February of 2013, I made a presentation and a technical analysis to a bunch of engineers on the Hanford Advisory Board's River and Plateau Committee. After discussion, there was some objections and the committee decided not to pursue it. Later, in the years following, the Hanford Advisory Board revised that decision, and it is now among their highest priorities. From 2015 to 2016, DOE committed to move the capsules from wet storage to dry storage and to finish that about 2022 to 2023. In August 2017, after our building, we moved to a new building. It was entirely lit with LED lights and I was destroyed. I was pretty well forced to retire for my own health's sake. And so I did in August of 2017. Greg retired about a year later from the U.S. Department of Energy. This is a cross-section of what WESF looks like in diagram form, looking from the north as the other pictures were. And what you see on the left is the series of hot cells where they process the cesium and strontium into salt form and put it into the capsules. And then those were moved to the right over into water-filled basins on the western end of the building. When you go inside the building, this is what a hot cell looks like. The windows there are about 3 feet thick. They're extremely radiation resistant because the radiation dose inside those rooms is extremely high. About 5 years ago, DOE had to go in and grout these rooms as well as the ventilation system because they had been sufficiently damaged by radiation over the years that they were a disaster hazard themselves. As they did that, they ended up with a radioactive release into the pool area that exposed some of the workers. The capsules themselves were made up of two capsules. There's an inner capsule and an outer capsule. The outer capsule for both cesium and strontium is made of 316 stainless steel. The inner capsule for cesium is made of 316 stainless, and for strontium is made of Hastelloy C. The chemistry that they chose for these capsules, the alloys, is unfortunate in that stainless steel suffers from what is called chloride stress corrosion. It causes the steel to crack and fail. And in the case of cesium chloride, when the temperature gets over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, it particularly goes quite quickly. As I said, here the two capsules look virtually identical from the outside. They're about 21 inches long, they're about 2.5 inches in diameter, and they weigh about 25 pounds. The amount of radioactive material in them is sufficient that they generate as much as 1 or 2 100-watt light bulbs for the cesium capsules and about 4 100-watt light bulbs for the strontium capsules. Because of that, these things will overheat quite quickly if they're left out of water, and they have to be kept cooled continuously. Today, the total of the capsules produce about 222 kilowatts of power. If you go inside the building and you look, on the left you can see a picture of what the surface looks like. It's an industrial facility. There's a crane that runs over the top so that they can access things. And the pits down below, the basin cells, is where the capsules are stored. And you can see them in the middle and right pictures. They're just steel capsules sitting in racks, not far off the concrete floor and not far from the concrete walls. This is another picture of the same cells. You can see by their age, even though all of the plumbing is made out of stainless steel, it still has corrosion just because it is that old. This picture, DOE uses the center picture quite a lot to show what's happening in the cells, but it's actually a little bit of a misnomer. On the left, you see what an actual daylight picture of the canyon looks like and the cesium hot cells. You really can't see much. There's just a water-filled basin and the operator's using long reach rods to handle the capsules. In the middle, what they did is they took a picture like that and they superimposed a long time-lapse photo in the dark of what the capsules look like. The gamma rays that come out of the cesium end up emitting a very high dose into the water, where the gamma rays are actually traveling faster than the speed of light. They then have to slow down to the speed of light, and as they do that, they give off other light called Cherenkov radiation, which causes them to look blue-purple. And that's what you're seeing on the two pictures on the right. And likewise, this is a picture looking straight down, again, a long time lapse showing you the arrangement of the capsules and the Cherenkov radiation. The WESF facility, when you look from above, this is its layout. The hot cells are there in the middle, and on the left you can see the pool area that I highlight in green. Today there are only 5 of the cells that are actually in use, and those are the ones that have had the highest damage to the concrete walls. The problem is that if the basins are to drain down, if anything ever happens that causes the water to be lost, when the water hits 6 feet above the capsules, the radiation levels in the building are such that no human can be there. Everybody must leave immediately and they cannot return. If the water level continues to drop and the capsules are uncovered, humans are not able to approach within about 50 yards of the building due to the enormous radiation fields. With no cooling, the cesium capsules, as I said before, will overheat. The chloride stress corrosion causes them to crack and fail and ultimately release all of their contents out into the environment. The amount of heat that are generated by the capsules is so great that in the analysis DOE did many decades ago, they calculated that the building temperature on the loss of a single cell's water, that the temperature would soar to 350 to 1500 degrees centigrade, which would result in the concrete roof and walls failing and collapsing the structure into the pool. And as they noted, no emergency response or recovery is possible ever once that happens. This is some paragraphs out of that original analysis. This is particularly from a hazard analysis, but also out of the thing they call a basis of interim operations. And for a loss of water from a single pool, they note that the dose rate due to direct gamma shine for a receptor 100 meters, this is back in 1980, 60 meters today, from the nearest WESF outside wall would be 2 rem per hour. A high radiation area is 100 millirem per hour, 1/20th of this, and that requires very special control just to enter. With doses this high, you can't approach the building, and even if you could, you can't go inside because the temperatures would be lethal. They went on to say that loss of water from a single pool cell creates a fatal dose field within the pool cell area and a field of approximately 120 R or rem per hour immediately outside the structure. Today, that would be 75 R per hour due to radioactive decay of the cesium. And currently there is no control that could be relied on to terminate the event once capsules have been uncovered. Thus, facility control is effectively lost. These are their words from 4 decades ago. So everything relies on prevention. There's a limited ability to add water to the WESF basin. Because of evaporation, they're constantly adding water, but the water line is not all that large. To prevent disaster, water has to be added faster than it leaks out of the basin. There's no easy way to estimate just how large that water addition must be, but it is a lot. DOE currently plans to use water tankers to provide water in the event of emergency, but as I noted before, if the building actually reaches the point the water level drops within 6 feet of the capsules, nobody can go inside. And if it drops even lower, nobody can even approach the building. And DOE, as we saw with the Purex facility in the tunnels there, they are often slow to respond. It takes them time to make decisions. And so if the water level drops within the 6 feet of the capsules, we're all done. And if they're delayed at all, that will happen. So what's the result? As the cesium capsules overheat, corrode, crack, and fail, they release their contents into what's then the rubble of the building. The original analysis back in the early days estimated that 5 capsules would fail in a month. That might be a little bit slower today for some reasons, but also we know more, and we know the capsules fail at lower temperatures, so it might be more. With no cooling, the temperatures in the capsules rise, and the cesium chloride causes the 316L stainless to rapidly fracture and fail. Cesium as a gas is highly volatile. It will release from the pile as a vapor and become particulates on the surface. And as rainwater infiltrates, or if we spray water onto the pile, the water will percolate down around the hot cesium and then be turned to steam, which will also drive the cesium movement toward the surface. One of the measures of how bad this could be is just to estimate how much cesium might come to the surface. And this is a really hard calculation. If only 10% of the cesium rises to the surface, the amount of cesium on the surface will equal that released from the Chernobyl disaster. And to give you an idea, with Chernobyl covered a very large area, and it's a different case because it's a nuclear reactor explosion. And so you end up with a lot of material was ejected into the sky and it fell down at some distance, and you can see that to the upper right in the left picture. In the middle of the left picture, you see where the Chernobyl plant was, and the deep red and deep orange areas are the areas that are the confiscated and closed zone and the permanent control zone where people can't go except with very special precautions and limited time. If I take that same area, the green circle is about 100 kilometers across. If I take that same circle and I superimpose it on Hanford on the right picture, it encompasses the entire Hanford site. And you can see a to scale representation of that with the Hanford site in the lower left corner in the first picture. So what's the ultimate risk? When WESF fails, no response will be possible for centuries. It will take upwards of 800 years for the radioactive cesium-137 to decay completely away. And for the first several centuries, it will be extremely dangerous. Failure can happen in many ways. There is a pipe out of the bottom of this basin to drain it with a valve. If that pipe breaks or its connection to the facility breaks, that is not isolatable. They will not be able to stop the leak. If that happens, or if there's an earthquake that damages the basin where the concrete is already severely damaged, or if a roof collapses and drops its concrete into the building or into the basin floor, it will puncture the bottom of the basin. Or if there's a drone attack or even simple failure of the concrete from radiation, all of these will cause a drain down. There are 24 reactor sites that have suffered 57 industrial drone incursions between 2015 and 2019. These, needless to say, have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission extremely concerned. There's only a couple of them they've been able to explain, but several of these have been fleets of several drones that are 6 feet across. These are things that could be used to attack things like nuclear facilities. Failure at WESF can and likely would lead to a complete failure of the Hanford cleanup and the uncontrollable spread of radioactivity across the region. The reason for this is that as the cesium goes to the surface uncontrolled and spreads around, people can't be in that loose contamination area. It isn't just about the gamma dose. If you ingest cesium into you, it's much worse. If the radioactive cesium dusts the waste treatment plant, which is not finished yet, it will be rendered essentially unusable. And the same problems exist not just here, but across the nation at every nuclear spent fuel storage pool. The clock is absolutely ticking. The result, if this is allowed to happen, would be a beyond Chernobyl catastrophe. Because as the contamination moves across the site, it essentially makes it impossible to do cleanup, first in the 200 East area, then in the 200 West area, and then the entire Hanford site. And all of the radioactive material at Hanford is placed at risk where it does whatever it's going to do without human intervention. The capsules must be urgently moved to dry storage. DOE is currently planning to do this, but they're also planning to delay it, and that's because of funding. The basin walls absolutely must be destructively examined to develop real data on what the condition of the pool walls are and to determine how high radiation dose impacts concrete under real-world conditions. And DOE has failed to make that firm commitment so far. The things that we're most needing from you, that I most need from you, is to bring pressure on DOE to do these two things, to urgently get the capsules out and to examine the walls, to get the data so that we know what all the other basins in the United States are doing. The safety basis for WESF did not consider radiation dose to the concrete at all. There's very little data on that. And the data that they did use is based on concrete that has been exposed to water and is wet. The data that they excluded and did not use is for concrete that, like WESF, is protected from water and is dry. There's two reactors, the X10 reactor back east and the Temelin reactor in the Czech Republic, that both had dry concrete and that were destructively examined. Their dry concrete showed 1,000 to 2,000 times more sensitivity to gamma dose than wetted concrete. And to give you an idea what that looks like in graph form, and this for non-technical folks is a terrible graph because it's in logarithmic on the bottom for dose, and the safe region is on the left, the damaged region is on the right. The curves on the right is what the wetted concrete curves look like for what dose causes how much damage, and the curves on the left are for dry concrete. And the pink bands here is the range of dose that the concrete walls at WESF have already received. And it is beyond what the concrete can safely absorb without being damaged. So what's DOE planning to do? Glenn Konzak did a presentation last year from DOE. And what they're going to do is take 3 capsules each and put them into a universal sleeve you see on the left. Those universal sleeves then go in a ring into a transportable storage canister, and then the whole thing is loaded with 132 capsules. Then they place a concrete sleeve around the outside to shield it and also provide airspace to cool the capsules and lifting lugs to handle it. And then those all go sit on a pad out in the middle of the site. And that's pretty much the problem that we face. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amrithan so that she can do her presentation.
Thank you, Dirk. So good afternoon, everyone. So I am Amritam Babu, and I've been doing outreach for Hanford Challenge for the last 2 years. I think that was a lot of information from Dirk. A big chunk of my job is to convert these very technical and complex issues and happenings at Hanford into simpler layman language and share what's happening at the site. It's really embarrassing, but before joining Hanford Challenge, I had no clue about Hanford, never heard of it, and this applies to most people I've met, even those who have grown up in the Pacific Northwest, which is really sad. A site of this significance and importance isn't taught at school, not shared, and not discussed, which means very less is aware about what's happening, and lesser is the public participation when it comes to important decisions. Dirk mentioned in depth on why it is important that we act on WESF now. You also heard about extreme dangers when it comes to if there is an earthquake or if the water drains, if the roof collapses or the capsules overheat and spreads radiation. So we all as taxpayers should be aware about what's happening at Hanford, participate in the process, raise our concerns, and ensure a safe and effective cleanup of the site. So I will talk mainly about what are some of the challenges we face when we talk about Hanford and how you can help get the word out. So these are the top 4 concerns we have or challenges, and I'll explain each one in depth. So there was a comment period that ended last week. Public comment period for construction of Basin 41 at the LERF and 200 area ETF. Needs no explanation, right? It's very easy to understand. Well, my first week at Hanford Challenge, I felt as though I am in an alien land with people surrounding who are talking in strange language that I barely understood. After 2 years, I still feel the same. Imagine the plight of someone new to Hanford hearing terms like LERF, ETF, RECRA, ERDF, WESF, permit modification. I won't blame anyone if this sounds really technical and boring. The truth is Hanford is technical and complex, and a lot of people hesitate when you hear such acronyms, and most of the acronyms has become their own word. But the issues are simpler than it sounds. Take, for example, WESF. It contains cesium and strontium, and our bodies absorbs these elements like potassium and calcium, and these get deposited in our bodies and bones, causing cancer and other health issues. So we cannot risk an exposure. And this just doesn't apply to us, but also the soil, animals, plants, the Columbia River. So to address all this, organization like ours and Columbia Riverkeeper, we develop lots of resources like our Say What guides, fact sheets. Here's a snippet of that on the screen. That are really easy to understand and gives an idea about most of the important issues and happenings at Hanford, what Dewey's proposal is, and how it would impact us and the environment in the long run. Whenever we talk about Hanford, we constantly have this challenge or need to communicate clearly on what's happening and the urgency of certain situations without creating a panic wave. There are certain parts of Hanford that needs immediate attention, like WESF. There are also some others that needs more analysis and clarity about the waste inside and a detailed plan on how to clean them up. This is just an example on the right to show how a complex data or a news article that can be really boring or difficult to understand. This article is not that difficult, but most of the others are really difficult and complicated to understand. So how we convert it into a simpler graphic with images and makes it more interesting and grabs the attention of people. Then next is no urgency. So when we talk about this, there is 2 things. Hanford cleanup, when we are talking about Hanford cleanup, we are talking about 100 years, and that can be a little overwhelming. Also, when you hear about radionuclides with half-lives of 28,000 years, most have this notion that we have time to clear up the mess, and Hanford isn't something to address right now. But is this true? No. Just because the half-life spans to thousands of years doesn't mean the radioactive waste is safe inside the tanks or capsules. I think WESF is an exception here because for once, we all agree that WESF needs immediate attention, which is not the case when we talk about Hanford. When we take WESF, the total mass of cesium and strontium capsules and their content is approximately 15 metric tons. As Dirk mentioned in his presentation, it is around 84 million curies of radioactivity now, about 1/3 of the total radioactivity at Hanford. And this is expected to decrease by radioactive decay to about 44 million curies by 2048, which is still a lot, right? So do we act now or wait with our fingers crossed? So these are some of our action campaigns of the past, but we do have one scheduled for 25th on WESF. So we do create a lot of materials and action campaigns to create that urgency and help get the word out. This also helps in more public participation, communicating the urgency, and help in making informed decisions and comments. Should I be worried? Hanford is 300 miles from my city. It's a 5-hour flight from my state. It's in a different country. Hanford is out there in the Tri-Cities. We don't have to be bothered. This mindset is actually scary. I know a lot of people think Hanford isn't their concern because they don't live close to the Tri-Cities. We do speak on climate change, protecting nature, extinction of species, but when it comes to Hanford, it's in Tri-Cities, right? As taxpayers, we are all connected to Hanford, we agree or not. Budget for Hanford cleanup is much more than all of the Superfund cleanup put together. It is important that we all have opinions and are giving inputs on how to ensure safety for now and for the future. Again, WESF is a good example. If anything goes wrong, it would greatly affect the agriculture, economy, the Columbia River, and in fact affect the Pacific Northwest, not to mention losing one of the finest wine in the country. Organizations like ours and Columbia Riverkeeper, we work with a network of people, frequently organizing outreach events featuring elected officials, experts from Hanford, authors, and companies like Patagonia who support the cleanup of Hanford. So Dirk already mentioned about this. This is what Dirk said. Hanford is a long-term problem, right? The cleanup can take about 100 years. There is a need to have diverse participation and involvement. We need more voices from people of color, different age groups, working classes, industry. Not trying to sound accusatory or not trying to accuse, but most of the participation now is from senior people who are connected to Hanford or Tri-Cities in some way. I do understand that there is a strong reason why, because they got involved during the Cold War or during the start of cleanup. But it is really crucial that we need more voices from young people and other industries and other people of color to take this cleanup forward. This data is from the most recent estimated timeline of cleanup that was shared by Department of Energy. It's Department of Energy's 2090 Life Cycle Scope Schedule and Cost Report. According to this, the cleanup is expected to go through 2100. My son, who will be 1 next month, would mostly be 8 years by then. So how do we change this pattern and current pattern and involve more diverse participation in the decision making? Unlike other environmental and public issues which have visible changes like melting of ice or glacier, pink snow, which grabs the attention and interest of people, this is something that is really difficult. It's underground and it's intangible, like the tank waste, radiation, contamination spread, which makes it more harder to draw the attention to the ongoing cleanup process. We did create an online community, Hanford Challenge Social Club, with the idea of connecting different people and having open conversations, not just about Hanford, but also anything and everything the community wants to share. We also connect with professors and college students and mentor projects related to Hanford, also giving talks to grad students and masters to help create awareness and interest in Hanford. Now that you're excited about Hanford and wants to jump in, let me share how you can get involved and make a difference. Participate in public meeting, learn, and take action. Most of the time, it would just be writing an email, sending across a postcard, or even sharing a sentence or two on the web page. I sometimes feel we don't give public opinions much credit. We tend to think it's just one opinion, it's not going to make a big difference. But the truth is, every opinion matters, every participation counts. It's just please don't hesitate to share how you feel about a particular issue. A single opinion or comment might be enough to urge government into rethinking critical processes and policies. Talk and discuss Hanford with your family and friends. There is only so much small organization like ours can do. Be our ambassadors in getting the word out. Help spread the word. There are lots of information and resources which are really easy and simple to understand on our website and social media handles. And if you need more clarity, you can always write to us or message us on Facebook, and we would be happy to help. And the last one is connect your community. If you think there is any event or crowd that would be interested to know more about Hanford, we would love to participate. So, when do you think that was the last time Hanford got national attention? When there was a vapor exposure and workers' health and family was at risk. When the Purex tunnel collapsed. It's actually sad to see that an accident needs to happen for Hanford to reach or get the national attention, right? This is an ideal scenario that I look forward to in the near future. Cesium and strontium capsules safely moved to dry storage unit. This would be an amazing headlines, but might not be very exciting for a national headline. We as taxpayers have a responsibility to know about the cleanup, raise our concern and voices. It's one of the biggest cleanup, and $2 billion a year is no joke. It's really important to act on WESF now. We still have time to prevent a crisis. So let's work together for a safer future at Hanford. Here we have created a 30-second video on WESF. This is how we can condense a complicated topic into something more visual and interesting.
This is Hanford, the most radioactive waste site in the Western Hemisphere. Why? Because it made plutonium for bombs for 45 years, and that made a huge mess. One of the most dangerous sites at Hanford is the Waste Encapsulation Storage Facility. WESF provides underwater storage for over 1,900 capsules filled with highly radioactive strontium and cesium. A bad earthquake could cause an uncontrolled reaction, spreading radiation far and wide. No one wants that to happen. How do we stop it? Move the capsules out of the pools and into dry storage. The milestone to get the capsules into dry storage is 2025. We shouldn't wait. Get it done now.
All right. Well, thank you to both our panelists. It's actually really incredible the amount of radioactivity that we are talking about and the contamination that could arise from a failure at WESF. And that, you know, what we're seeing is the federal government actually delaying cleanup here, which seems unconscionable. So as Amrita mentioned in her presentation, one of the most important ways to get involved is to raise your voice and, you know, let the government know that we care about Hanford cleanup. So on your screen, in a few or in an email, there will be a link that you can click on to comment on this comment period right now, which is to thank the Department of Ecology's bold move adding WESF to Hanford's site-wide permit. So this would end up requiring the Department of Energy to create a legally enforceable closure plan for WESF and include changes necessary to move WESF's 1,936 cesium and strontium capsules into dry storage. And so it kind of seems like we might be on track to meet the 2025 deadline, or at least if this permit modification happens, have a legally enforceable plan in place. So now I want to go ahead and open up the floor for Q&A. I can tell that Dirk's presentations really, rattled our participants. So I hope that Rutham made everyone feel a little bit more empowered, but we do have several questions coming through. And Dirk, I know you flagged a few. Do you want to go ahead and read some and answer?
Wait, why don't I just run down the ones I did already, and then we'll start through the next group.
Okay, we'll see how many we can get through, and then we can keep recording if folks need to log off. This will be posted on our website as well. So
sounds good. The first thing I would tell everybody that hazards are not that unusual in the world. There are lots of things that are hazardous that get done and get done safely. And a lot of hazards exist that we don't realize and we have to go solve. The big problem is when we fail to know the hazard is there, or we fail to respond to it. Within the world of risk assessment, there's a common idea that risk is equal to the product of consequences times probability, which presumes that you can actually calculate what the probabilities are and that you can know what the consequences are. In many cases, neither of those is true. And so risk is a bigger thing than that. Also within the world of risk, there's a problem where if the risk is below a certain threshold, then that doesn't trigger action. That creates an incentive for people to try to change the analysis to get below the threshold so they don't have to spend money or take action, which is a very perverse kind of thing. We could, in general, change that to say, if the consequence is greater than some particular level, we immediately require action always. So there's some basic philosophical decisions that need to be made and changed at the federal and state levels, and everyone in your generations can play a role in that. The questions, one of the questions is why were 5 pools not being used and not the others? I've asked that question and I never have gotten a satisfactory answer. I think it's just operational convenience that everything's all together in one place. There may be other things about how the pools were used in the past, but I've never really gotten a satisfactory answer. I answered the next one already about the probability and consequence. Why haven't the capsules been transferred to dry storage by now? That's a good question. Why did the facility go beyond its design life and still have capsules in it? DOE has a tendency, when things don't have a disaster going on, to regard them as being something they can defer till later. And there are so many projects at Hanford and so many priorities that you end up with competing efforts between the US Department of Energy and their beliefs, as well as their people's beliefs, ecology and EPA, about what the priorities ought to be. And they end up doing a thing where there's not enough money to fund everything. And so they do what they call rack and stack every year, where they prioritize the top items and they focus the funding there, and anything that goes below the line gets little or no funding. The cesium capsules were one of those. The presentation, yeah, I will be making a copy of it available for sharing so that you can download it. So what kind of response would DOE have if there was a problem? Currently, the plan is that they'll bring tankers in and use tankered water to supply the basin to make up water. The problem with that is we have no idea how big the leak will be. And it could be anything from something small they could deal with to something catastrophic that they cannot. And if the levels drop low enough in the basin that the capsules begin irradiating the area so that people can't go there, that solution can't work. It just simply isn't possible. What they need is the ability to add water instantaneously, and even more important is just to get the capsules out of there, get them into dry storage as quickly as possible. The entire seminar is being recorded, obviously.
We will have the webinar available on Riverkeeper's website and then emailed to participants who RSVP'd as well. So for all of you asking, it will be available.
Yeah, and as far as the priority in the current 6 months, you're absolutely right that the COVID problems are going to dominate over everything. The work has to be done safely before it can be done. There are cases where the work may be more urgent. Firefighting on forest fires is an example of that, and the capsules might well rise to that level if something goes wrong. But in general, yes, it will be delayed somewhat just because of that. Is DOE assessing the integrity of the basin because they're planning to move the capsules? They already have assessed the integrity based on their own analysis, which is based on the concrete being wet. And they've decided that this is the highest risk in the entire United States Department of Energy complex. This site is number one. Even with that assessment, they're still putting its priority a little lower than some of the other things, particularly building the waste treatment plant to get waste out of tanks. Oop, things moved on me here. And the big problem there, by the way, is that we simply don't know in detail what the condition of the concrete really is. For the better part of the last decade, I've been pressing DOE and its contractors to include the data on dry concrete, and they have steadfastly refused to do it. And they have in each case gone through and said, well, this data point's no good because, and thrown out all of that data. Well, if you don't include the data that tells you what the risk is, then the risk is less. That doesn't make the actual risk less, but it makes the analysis less. Why are we not using the other 6 cells? Again, I don't know for sure. There was some talk about moving them, but part of the problem is that if any of the cells fail, the whole basin will fail ultimately. And so because the damage has already occurred, it's not something that can really be resolved by taking the capsule from one cell to another. What they could do is move them to other cells that are less damaged, if any are, and then intentionally make sure those are isolated so they don't drain. That is a possible solution. How does DOE rationalize the delays? As I said, it's mostly from conflicting needs for the money. Where are our senators and representative staffs? Ooh, were they invited? I can't say I know the answer to that. Simone, do you? Were our senators and representatives or their staff invited to this forum?
To this webinar?
Yeah.
Unless they're signed up for Riverkeeper or Hanford Challenge emails, I don't think so. But it looks like someone in the chat did invite them, so that's great.
Okay. Estimated cost, I think the last I heard is about $200 or $300 million. Compare this in 1993 when I first hired with the Oregon Department of Energy, and my first week on the job, I found a problem at the K basins, 2 water-filled basins adjacent to the K reactors. That problem ultimately escalated to the Spent Fuel Working Group report, which ultimately escalated to the Spent Nuclear Fuel Project, where they removed 2,350 metric tons of rotting fuel from the basins. That took almost a decade to complete, and shortly after 2000, the last of that fuel was moved. The cost of that project was about $2.2 billion. This one's going to be quite a bit cheaper because it's a lot easier to do, and we don't have the level of contamination that was there. Next one's for Amrithan. Can you talk about the upcoming Take Action event on September 25th?
Definitely, Derek would be the speaker. And yeah, it's a lunch session, like where Derek will be again mentioning about what all actions can be taken and how to proceed in this coming period. So it's up on the website, and I can also share the event details on the chat.
Excellent. So the next one is, what would happen to WESF if a wildfire burned across Hanford? There have actually been 2 ginormous fires at Hanford. They were very terrible. They were like 900,000 acres each. In one case, the first one, the 24 Command Fire, burned off Rattlesnake Mountain in the southern half of the site. It actually burned across a couple of waste sites that had active radioactive material at the surface, one being a site over near the city where plutonium was released into the air. DOE denied that at the time and then later had to retract it, that yes, indeed, there was release. Fortunately, because this building is not made of combustible materials, and there isn't any combustible materials about it, the damages to the building itself would likely be small, and there's nothing to get fire within a near area of it. However, what it does to the support facilities might be another story. And if those are damaged and if water can't be added or other issues happen and people can't get there, that can create a different problem. Is WESF the only actual storage site for these 2 materials? At Hanford, yes. And there's no real comparable facility elsewhere in the nation. There are some facilities at Oak Ridge and Savannah River that have very radioactive materials in basins, and also in Idaho at the Idaho National Engineering Lab. The spent nuclear fuel from 3 Mile Island and the core meltdown there are stored at Idaho. And each of these facilities has similar kinds of potential issues. Also at Idaho, there's a facility called the Expended Core Facility that has had problems with the basin there. They store the samples of all the nuclear fuel from naval nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers and such. It's their library, if you will. And that facility has suffered similar damage, though exactly the details I can't tell you. Part I can't talk about because it's classified. Part I can't talk about because I don't know. I do know that about 2015, they had an urgent effort that they used the euphemism, the Ecf Recapitalization Project. You can always tell with DOE when they're trying to hide something when they name things like that. And what it was an urgent effort to move the fuel there into dry storage and also to build a new basin or to rebuild the basin, because they had had it fail and leak up to, I think it was 18,000 gallons a day. And every time they tried to repair the leak, it got worse. Assuming we do get into dry storage, is this safe? Does it also have a lifetime? It absolutely is not safe, ultimately. The capsules will heat up. The cesium chloride inside and the strontium will likely turn to liquid. This is not unexpected. That's part of the reason for the air cooling, is to try to keep that from happening. And over time, the capsules will slowly degrade. What's needed then is some long-term disposal path. Over the years, they've talked about taking the capsules back into WESF, which will not be possible, and cutting them open, taking the cesium and strontium out and adding it into the high-level waste to be fed into the waste treatment plant. To do that today will require the construction of a new facility, and that doesn't exist and no plans for it exist. Likewise, there's no place that is open for sending this waste for disposal. It will need to be stored. The cesium capsules, for the first 800 years it will take to mostly get rid of the cesium-137. The cesium-135, with about a 2 million year half-life, won't go away. It's going to be a problem forever. And so ultimately these capsules have to go into deep disposal somewhere. I've been educating my students about these issues as much as I can. So do you have all the similar live or Zoom presentations for my students? That one I think is a question for Simone. Or maybe Amrithan.
Yeah, no, we will definitely have this presentation available that you'll be able to share. So it'll have all the PowerPoints, and we will add in the missing video as well. Not the missing video, the missing audio from the video. So
excellent. For the next one are there other WESF type storage facilities at various nuclear reactors? Absolutely yes. Every nuclear reactor has a spent fuel storage pool. In many cases, the NRC has allowed them to go into what they call tight pack storing, or similar names, where the fuel is very close to the concrete. And my concern is that they may be suffering similar levels of damage. And that's one of the reasons why it is so urgent to get the data from this pool, where we can calculate what the dose was fairly precisely, to find out for dry concrete, what does gamma dose do to the concrete, to then be able to apply that knowledge to all the other facilities in the entire world. Around the world, there's probably 500 facilities like this. Any one of them failing will be a catastrophe. And so it's really important that this facility be emptied as soon as possible, just so they can core the walls. One of the questions I challenged DOE with back about 2014 was having them go in and actually core drill the walls to get that data. And DOE balked and said they weren't willing to do it because the risk was too high. I asked that question on purpose to get that very answer, to try to spur their own recognition that, yeah, the risks are too high, we have to get this out of here. That didn't really help, but it is something they're already aware of. Are the cells not being used empty of fluids? No, they're all full of water up to their tops. And how are the capsules kept cool in dry storage? If you remember in the final presentation, let me see if I can grab that really fast. What you can see, come on. Okay, oh, I have to click that. There we go. And then I want to play from here. If you notice here, the concrete around the inner cell, the capsule container, has an air channel. I won't use the mouse because it makes the slides move. You can see a blue arrow that's kind of hard to see on the left slide that shows you the air path, and then orange at the top. They're trying to indicate cold air at the bottom, warm air at the top. and then flowing out through the side of the canister. The canisters are intentionally designed for that use. The problem is that concrete, because it's damaged by gamma, and because there is little shielding between the capsules and the concrete in these canisters, the canister concrete will be destroyed in fairly short order. How long that will take is an open question, and again, we need the data to be able to answer that. Do you say similar problems exist elsewhere? Absolutely. As far as I can tell, pretty much at every nuclear facility on Earth. Now, how bad are they? And are they anywhere near the problem? We don't know. In reading the research literature, there's only about 3 or 4 papers that really get to the heart of what the damage is to concrete with temperature. And one of the disturbing possibilities is that from one of the papers, when you look at 2 of the graphs, and you look at the amount of damage versus dose and the dose rate, it is possible that what happens is not really that it's aggregate dose that causes the damage. It may well be that if there's some significant amount of dose to the concrete from gamma rays, that it starts a process that then runs on its own over time. And if that is true, then dose isn't the issue and the concrete is likely destroyed in all of these facilities. But that's an unresolved question. And it's a question that frankly is not even being asked. How many capsules are stored at WESF to be moved? I think the total number is 1,962. It's just shy of 2,000. And all but, I think, 23 of those capsules, there were a number of the capsules that were taken and used at other sites for sterilizing food for radiation dose. And those were taken in and out of water, and they thermally heated up and cooled down, and that led to damage to the capsules, like what I was describing, that led to one of them leaking. All of those were brought back to Hanford, and then they used a shake test where they actually take capsules out of the basin and shake them and see if they went clunk. If they went clunk, it meant the inner capsule wasn't swollen. And all the ones that were swollen or leaking, they put into a third capsule. These are called type W. There's 23 of those, as I recall. And what does Dewey do with public comments? They read them, and unfortunately like in the case of the state of Oregon, we commented for a long time on a lot of issues. And at times on issues where Dewey just didn't want to address it, we would get responses such as comment noted. Those were particularly difficult to take. So what we tried to do is to work behind the scenes a lot, to work with the technical staff to resolve the problems and not get into the comment response period. But they quite often will address comments. The more public comment there is, the more likely they are to address it. And the more the comments go in the same direction but are different, the more likely they are to respond. And why can't the waste just be thrown in WIP? WIP is particularly not able to handle this waste. The waste isolation pilot plant down in New Mexico is in a salt bed, and the heat from the capsules would end up melting the salt ultimately and causing things to move. That would be a very bad thing to have happen. We're at 1 o'clock now. I'll continue with these, but as people need to leave, obviously you will. Can you discuss destructive examination of the walls, and are there dangers associated with? What exactly would you hope to find, and what would be the mitigation process for potential problems? The examination of the walls needs to happen after the capsules are gone. And the reason for that is that the damage is, if it is as severe as it is, doing the drilling activity itself may cause the failure of the wall. And you certainly wouldn't want to do that while the capsules are in there, which is the reason my question was more rhetorical early in the decade than anything. It was to highlight to them the degree of the hazard. What the data is that you're trying to recover is as you go down closer to where the top of the capsules are, the dose is virtually none, say 6 feet above the capsules, and then gets more and more as you go closer to them. And so what you're trying to do is get a core sample of the concrete where you can test its strength and test its chemistry to find out what's happening as you get closer and closer to the capsules, and to do that in different regions of dose around the basin, depending upon what the capsules contained and how close they were to the concrete. And from that data, then you can go back and create curves like the one I showed earlier that tell you what's the dose at levels, what is the dose that causes the concrete to fail, or what do we believe it is, and from that to create a safety standard. Can any of these stabilization or cleanup methods be supplemented, covered relatively soon by the Superfund cleanup funds? Superfund is exhausted. I don't think that they have refilled it at all, and so there isn't that. And all of Hanford is a Superfund cleanup. It's funded directly by the Congress, so there is that. And what chemical bonds are damaged in concrete by the gamma rays? That is an excellent question, but one I've avoided because it gets technically weird. If you look at what concrete really is, there is a series of chemicals that go together to create something called concrete paste. And it's composed of any of about 3 or 4 different chemical compounds. One of those in particular is made up of, calcium and silicate and other things, along with some waters of hydration. And like in a lot of chemistry, waters of hydration become part of the crystalline structure. They're not independent. With gamma rays, what they believe happens is that the gamma ray kicks out some of the waters of hydration and destabilizes the paste, and then it chemically falls apart. The other thing they know that it does is it tears apart some of the waters, kicking out hydrogen atoms, and it ends up forming peroxides in the concrete. And the peroxides themselves end up damaging the concrete paste. What exactly is happening is not entirely understood. The papers on it are very interesting. If you're a chemist, I would recommend reading them. And there's a lot of unknown chemistry there to pursue if anybody is interested. And I think then we have one more. Will there be more live Zoom events? Back to you, Simone.
Yes, we will continue to have live Zoom events about Hanford, what's going on, current comment periods. We might have to do a WESF part 2, it seems, from this marathon of questions we just went through. And as Amrita mentioned, and she put a link in the chat for all our panelists, Hanford Challenge will be having a live Zoom event on September 25th, which Dirk, I believe you're a part of as well. But yeah, so I think that was all the questions. Did we get one more?
There is one more, and one you dismissed.
One more.
And the one you dismissed had, or someone did, about, has there ever been an outreach to mayors or involved mayors for peace to educate more leaders in the local communities?
Oh.
And the answer is absolutely yes. Mayors, representatives, senators, you name it, governors, in some cases, actually definitely tribal leaders and tribal representatives, but also even a premier from Canada at one point, back in the 1990s. One of the efforts through the Hanford Advisory Board and others has been to try to extend outreach, not just to all the potentially interested parties, but also between all the different sites. And so every year, the Hanford Advisory Board is actually a part, it advises the folks at Hanford, but it is a part of a larger board that advises all of the Department of Energy. And so each of the different advisory boards, they're normally called CABs, Citizen Advisory Boards, at each of the various DOE sites get together once a year and talk about what the major issues are and what needs to be done, and share lessons learned from each of the sites. So a lot of this does happen, a lot of it's behind the scenes. In the case of the Hanford Advisory Board, at times mayors and city managers have sat on the board. At other times they have had their representatives there. And so yes, they are quite often involved. And for myself, thank you very much for attending and listening in. This is an unbelievably technically difficult subject. The consequences are potentially quite huge. And our whole goal, as always, is to ensure that ideally nothing ever happened and nobody needed to know. In this case, it has taken a lot more than that, and it takes more effort, and it's going to take a lot of you. I had planned, like I say, to be involved to the bitter end on this one. Unfortunately, because of events, that was not possible. And so now it needs to turn over to the next generation. And I thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Amrutham. I think that participants really enjoyed this and you got through lots of questions. So really appreciate that. As we mentioned, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Don't forget to comment. All right.
You.
Bye.
Bye.